This is the diagram, or really basic diagram of the national grid. Now all the national grid is the system that produces, generates and transports electricity around the country. So for the national grid it's the UK. So it generates and transports electricity around the UK. And there's loads of really interesting clips you can watch of people who work at the national grid and see how they make sure that electricity gets to where it needs to be at the right time, especially during advert breaks of TV shows like EastEnders. When everyone puts the kettle on, they need to add extra power. But it generates as the power stations and transports, so it's to do with the power cables, and these are the kind of iconic part of the national grid, the pylons around the UK. Now, I've got here the national grid with transformers, so I'm going to quickly go through what all of these things are. We start with the power station, okay? Then within the power station, we know if we look at the last video that we just did, we end with the generator going into a step-up transformer. So this here is a step-up transformer, which increases the voltage of the electricity that's created, okay? It then goes along the pylons and the wires, or the cables, as they really are, I suppose, more than wires because they're quite thick. So it's transported around the country using wires and pylons. Some of them are underground, in the cities they're underground, but out in the countryside, pylons and wire and high cables are much easier to deal with if they break or that kind of thing. If they're underground and something happens, you have to dig underground, which is a bit of an issue, whereas at least if it breaks in a pylon, you don't have to do that. It then, before it gets to your house, goes through a step-down transformer to decrease the voltage. Now that's because you don't want to have the high voltages that are carried here. This is like hundreds of thousands of volts, and you couldn't have that in your house very safely. And finally it gets to your house. Now this is not usually one step. There's usually substations, and you've probably seen transformer substations around. They're the ones that have got the pictures of electrocuted warning signs on the outside. And different places have different levels of voltage. So residential areas for houses will have 230 volts for mains electricity. But if you're going to a factory or an industrial area, it might be a little bit higher, or quite a lot higher if you're going to get, they have a different transformer system. Okay, but why do we need these transformers? Well, to think about that, the first thing we need to look at is what it would be like without a transformer. So all I've done is drawn the same thing without my two transformers. Now, this is a nearby house to the power station, that is. So this house is near a power station, and it's got its lights. When it turns its lights on, my really bad bulbs again, are lovely and bright lights. And let's say the voltage started off at the power station at 230 volts. The voltage is probably about 220 volts here. We've lost a bit of voltage because, you know, we've travelled along some wires, we've wasted some of the energy as heat. Now, this is a far away house. Most people don't live that close to a power station. Most people probably live a matter of 50, 100, 200 miles away from where their electricity is generated, at least. If we didn't have transformers, this house would have really, really dim lights. With a voltage of maybe 50 volts, maybe lower. It depends how far away it was. If it was here, it might be 100 volts. So the further away you got, the less voltage you would have in your electricity. So you don't have to run your electrical appliances. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to put things like straighteners or hair dryers on in other countries that have different voltages. So if you try and put a pair of straighteners on in America, if they're made in England, they often don't heat up very much because they're not designed for 230 volts there. They're designed for 230 volts, I suppose, and in America they only have 110 volts. So what we find happens, if you measure the voltage, as you go along the power cables here, you lose voltage. And that's because you're losing energy. As the electricity travels through the wires, they're losing energy. It's wasted as heat. A little bit of sound, but mainly as heat. Okay. Now that's because of this. We've got two equations that we know that involve current and voltage. This is power equals voltage times current, and this is Ohm's law. Voltage equals current, V equals IR. Voltage equals current over resistance. I've completely written that wrong. It's not V equals I over R, it's V equals IR. Please ignore that. Okay, V equals IR, Ohm's law. Voltage equals current times resistance. Now, if I rearrange this equation, so V over R equals I, that one is right, and put that into here, I get P equals I, which is V over R, times V, which is equal to V squared over R. Okay, now once again, this is going towards the realms of A-level physics, so do not panic if it makes no sense. Okay, now here I can see that power equals voltage squared over resistance. So if I've got a low voltage, I'm going to lose a lot of power because I'm going to have a high resistance. However, if I increase the voltage of my electricity, I'm going to decrease the resistance quite a lot to have the same power. And if I decrease the resistance, that's good, because the lower the resistance, the easier it is for the electricity to travel through the wires, the less heat that is lost. Now that's a really vague and quick look at that. But the reason that we lose a lot of electricity at low voltages is because of this equation. And the way we can stop that is by doing this, by increasing the voltage. So if I think back to this problem here, I saw that I have my nearby house has got really bright lights, and my faraway house has got really dim lights. Now if I do the same thing here, my nearby house will have, say, 230 volts. We're happy, nice bright lights. I step up the voltage here, it goes to hundreds of thousands of volts. Okay, I step it down again to 230 here, and the person at this house, nice and happy because they've got bright lights as well, and they've got electricity that works. Now, as we go across here, we still have some energy losses, but they're so much smaller. Because if you carry electricity at a really high voltage, you waste less energy than if you carry it without stepping up the voltage. Okay, you're stepping up the voltage, you're decreasing the current. So the whole point of transformers is it means that even far away houses, even far away businesses and industries can get the same voltage of electricity, the same power of electricity than things that are nearby. And without them, we wouldn't be able to have power stations away from cities, and we'd have really smoky cities because, you know, power stations use a lot of coal, they use a lot of oil, they burn a lot of substances. And that's what used to happen in New York City. So in New York, when they first used electricity, they used direct current, and that had to be produced near to where it was being used. When they started to use AC current instead, and so they could use transformers, it meant they could move the power stations out of the city and then have a much cleaner city as the case. So the national grid just generates and transports electricity around the UK, but it uses transformers to reduce the energy losses in the power cables, which means that people far away can have as higher voltage electricity because you haven't lost that energy.